Committee will come to order. Without objection, the Chair is authorized to declare recess of the committee at any time. The committee meets today to consider H.R. 4670, the Secure Delivery for America Act of 2014, H.R. 2750, the Design, Build, Efficiency and Jobs Act of 2013, H.R. 4671, Public Interest Declassification Board Reauthorization Act of 2014, and several postal namings. The committee will now consider H.R. 4670, the Secure Delivery for America Act of 2014. The clerk will please designate the bill.
H.R. 4670, a bill to amend Title 39 United States Code to enhance the security and efficiency of nationwide mail and parcel delivery.
Without objection, H.R. 4670 will be considered as read and open for amendment at any point. I have an amendment in the nature of the substitute. The clerk will please designate the amendment.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 4670, offered by Mr. Issa of California.
Without objection, the amendment will be considered as read and open for amendment at any point. The text has already been distributed and is in each of your folders. I will now recognize myself for an opening statement. The Secure Delivery for America Act is a targeted, flexible, and data-driven way to enable the Post Office to provide millions of more Americans access to secure delivery options. It will save the fiscally troubled Post Office several $billion each year. Currently, mail delivery is divided into three main types: curbside, with 55 million homes and addresses; centralized, with 40.5 million addresses; and door, with 37 million addresses. Of these methods, centralized delivery, typically via a cluster box, and for the members of the committee, as demonstrated in the back of the room with some samples, is the most cost savings the Post Office, and it saves the Post Office more than $200 per address each year compared to the cost of door delivery. A good example of $200 would be more than one first-class letter every single day of the week, whether there is delivery or not. So for many people who receive only a piece of mail or two, the cost of door delivery exceeds the gross revenue of every single first-class stamp they receive. Well, the Postal Service long ago shifted away from implementing door delivery for new addresses. It has done little to convert the addresses of to more modern forms of delivery at these addresses. Mail is delivered to either a small door slot or a very small mail receptacle, both of which have little or no room for package delivery. As an alternate, all new residential cluster boxes include a secure mail. A cluster box include a secure mail slot for each address, and also contain parcel lockers for large packages. Greater use of cluster boxes will give Americans more access to safe, locked locations to receive high-value items in the mail, averting the worry of delivery packages that are left to the elements and or stolen off the stoop. As e-commerce continues to grow, Americans use mail to purchase more items, and need secure package delivery is currently expanding at a rapid rate. To help address the need, Secure Delivery for America Act would direct the Post Office to convert just 1.5 million addresses each year for 10 years away from door delivery and toward secure centralized delivery. Under the SDA, less than 1% of all addresses would be converted in any given year, and over a 10-year period, only 40% of door delivery addresses would be converted, giving the Post Office clear flexibility to move forward where conversions make the most sense. Importantly, even if conversion were split evenly between centralized and curbside delivery, the Postal Service would save $2 billion a year once the program is fully implemented. That is equal to the savings the Postal Service projects from implementing package-only delivery on Saturdays. Furthermore, the modest transition cost for centralized delivery would easily be paid for without any cost to the postal customer. At $73 per address, the Postal Service will be able to recoup the cost of cluster boxes purchases and installation in just 5 months. Again, this system conversion pays for itself in just 5 months, while providing the resident both secure storage for their envelopes and secure access to packages. The Secure Delivery Act of 2014 is a common-sense way to help Postal Service save money and offer more secure service to its customers. I urge my colleagues to support the bill. I look forward to the amendment process, and I recognize the gentleman from Maryland, the ranking member, Mr. Cummings.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The Postal Service is a link that holds all corners of our nation together. It delivers mail to more than 150 million addresses nationwide and maintains a network of approximately 32,000 post offices. This quarter, the Postal Service reported losses of $1.9 billion due to continued declines in first-class mail volume and increases in operational costs due to inflation. Despite these challenges, the Postal Service actually took in more this quarter than during the same quarter last year and improved its overall cash position. Since 2006, the Postal Service has reduced its total workforce by more than 200,000 employees and streamlined its operations through network closures and consolidations. The Postal Service has also significantly expanded its parcel and package services. These products grew by an estimated 8% in the second quarter alone. As I have said before, the Postal Service cannot cut its way to profitability, and I must take a moment to express my thanks to the unions for their cooperation in working with the Postal Service to make the cuts that were necessary. I believe we need to pass a comprehensive reform legislation that we can all agree on it. And I believe the Postal Service should have significantly expanded authority to develop and introduce new products and services to meet customers' changing needs. If the Postal Service is to be run like a business, it should have the flexibility all other businesses have to provide products people really want. Unfortunately, the legislation before us today is not a comprehensive reform measure. This bill is similar to provisions previously considered by the committee. Back in July 2013, the committee considered H.R. 2748, which would have effectively eliminated door delivery in our country. The committee passed that bill on a party line vote, but it was never brought to the floor of the House for consideration. I commend the Chairman for the modest improvements in the measure before us compared to the provisions of H.R. 2748, but I cannot support this measure in its current form. This bill would require the Postal Service to convert at least 1.5 million addresses currently receiving door delivery per year over a 10-year period to curbside, cluster box, or sidewalk delivery points. The bill would require the conversion of more than one-third of the addresses currently receiving door delivery. This bill would allow people slated for conversion to a new delivery point to continue receiving door delivery if they pay a new delivery fee. The provision threatens to create a Cadillac lane within our nation's Postal Service. Unlike the legislation we considered in 2013, the bill before us does not provide resources to assist the Postal Service in funding the conversion process. The Postal Service continues to warn that its cash position is precarious and this bill would likely exacerbate that problem. I continue to urge the committee to work together on a comprehensive and bipartisan reform package to put the Postal Service on a sustainable financial path. And at the appropriate time, I will offer an amendment. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for his opening statement. I'll hold the record open until the end of the day for any members who wish to submit a written opening statement. Does any member wish to speak on the bill? Does any member wish to offer an amendment? Ms. Duckworth.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will read the amendment.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 4670, offered by Ms. Duckworth of Illinois.
The amendment will be considered as read, and the gentlelady is recognized to explain her amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of my concerns about curbside delivery is that Americans with disabilities will be unable to rely on what is now one of the core strengths of the Postal Service, its mission to serve all Americans regardless of profit considerations or convenience. I appreciate that the underlying bill has provisions that seek to address the needs of Americans who face physical hardships. It does require the U.S. Postal Service to set up a process through which customers can apply for a hardship waiver and continue receiving door-to-door delivery. My district is located in the suburbs of Chicago, and I worry that when we have over 60 inches of snow in a single winter like we did this year, people like me would not be able to get to the cluster boxes at the end of the street. It's simply not that easy for someone in a wheelchair or someone with paralysis or someone with any form of mobility impairment. It's also hard to imagine how we could ensure that all cluster boxes would be easily accessible for someone with limited dexterity. Looking at the two cluster boxes in the back of the room, sitting from my wheelchair, I would not be able to reach at least half of those boxes towards the top of the two boxes. And if you had any form of paralysis of your upper limb, such as through a stroke, you would not have the dexterity to operate those cluster boxes. So I am offering an amendment that I believe will strengthen the waiver provisions in the underlying bill and ensure that Americans with disabilities can continue to reliably receive their mail. Specifically, my amendment would require that an appeals process be created so that customers who disagree with the decision they get from the U.S. Postal Service on their waiver application can have recourse. The underlying bill requires the Postal Service to give 60-day notice by mail before converting service. My amendment would require the notice to include information about the physical hardship waiver process and how customers can apply. It would require that all waiver applications be processed before conversions to curbside delivery can proceed. This will incentivize the Postal Service to respond to waiver applications in a timely manner and ensure that the change to curbside delivery is not made until the needs of everyone on the block or in the neighborhood are accounted for. Finally, the underlying bill requires the Postal Service to provide an annual report on the implementation of this legislation to Congress and to the Inspector General. My amendment would require that report include information on how many applications for physical hardship exemption were submitted, the number granted and denied, and the number of decisions appealed, and the outcome of the appeals. This will allow us to monitor whether the waiver system is working as intended and whether changes are needed to ensure universal access to postal delivery. Thank you for your consideration of these changes, and I yield back.
Would the gentlelady yield?
I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Would the gentlelady yield?
I yield, Mr. Chairman.
The Chair is prepared to accept the amendment with a couple of changes that I understand have already been shown to you.
Yes, they have.
And you understand that the two changes, obviously one of them is to make sure that it is only the individuals asking for a waiver that would be delayed and not the overall project or nationally.
I agree that that more precise language is much better, Mr. Chairman.
And although we don't cite it, I'm asking, does the gentlelady envision that these waivers would include all elements of the Americans with Disability Act, which would include people who are shut in because they're afraid to go out and so on, not just physical disabilities?
That's my my belief, Mr. Chairman. Yes.
Okay. So with that, I thank the gentlelady. I would offer a second-degree amendment, and if there are no objections, I think this one will voice. Would you designate the second-degree amendment?
Amendment offered by Mr. Issa of California to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 4670 offered by Ms. Duckworth of Illinois.
As previously discussed, I believe it's self-evident. Are there any comments or questions? The ranking member.
Yeah, I just need to see it. May I see it? It sounds fine, Mr. Chairman. I was just wanted to go back to your last question. This is friendly. Of course. You were asking about whether it would be disabilities that were just beyond physical. So, and I just
Exactly. And I think Ms. Duckworth said that we're looking at all the elements of the Americans with Disability Act, both the physical accommodation, but also there are emotional and other reasons that people are unable to leave their home, and so the Post Office would observe it consistent with the statute.
Mr. Chairman, I think that is great. I think what happens a lot of times is that we just put emphasis on the physical, but a lot of people do have other disabilities, as we well know. And I think by making it more comprehensive, it just makes it a better amendment and a better bill. Okay. So I support the amendment.
All those in favor of the amendment the amendment to the amendment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The question now occurs on the amendment from the gentlelady from Illinois. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. Are there any further amendments?
I have an amendment, Mr. Chairman.
The clerk will read the amendment.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 4670 offered by Mr. Cummings of Maryland.
The gentleman is recognized to explain his amendment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The amendment I'm offering today would strike the requirement within the underlying bill that would mandate that the Postal Service convert a minimum of 15 million addresses that currently receive door delivery to either cluster box, curbside, or sidewalk service by 2024. Under my amendment, the Postal Service would continue to be required to determine which addresses should be converted to a more feasible mode of delivery, but no conversion quotas would be established. I commend the Postal Service for the steps it has already taken to improve efficiency of networks and routes. According to a recent GAO study between 2008 and 2013, the total number of door delivery points in the United States decreased by more than 300,000 addresses to its current total of approximately 38 million addresses. My amendment would make another important change to the base text. The underlying legislation requires the Postal Service to create a voucher program for patrons during the conversion process. However, the language states that the Postal Service may, and I emphasize may, defray all or any portion of the costs borne by the patrons. My amendment would require the Postal Service to cover all costs associated with the conversion process. No patron should be required to cover any costs associated with the conversion process. Our committee has yet to determine the actual costs or savings associated with converting residential or business addresses away from door delivery. GAO's report indicates that the data used by the Postal Service to make the assessments are more than 20 years old and may not accurately reflect the current costs. While door delivery may indeed be the costliest mode of delivery, we need reliable and current data to know for sure, and I urge members to adopt the amendment. With that, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I now recognize myself to offer an amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute. The clerk will read the amendment.
Reserve a point of order, Mr. Chairman.
Amendment offered by
Gentleman
Mr. Issa
reserves.
of California to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 4670 offered by Mr. Cummings of Maryland.
This is a procedural thing. When they designated us, they did not.
The amendment to the gentleman's amendment is designed to enhance a portion of his amendment and strike a portion. The gentleman from Maryland's point of no cost being borne by the recipient in this conversion. And I might add that I support that amendment. I believe that there is no excuse whatsoever for any postal recipient to bear the cost of a conversion that saves the Post Office money. However, in the first paragraph of his amendment, essentially this amendment strikes and eliminates any purpose for the underlying bill today. We all know that a goal and a dream are similar. The difference is a goal has a plan and a target and a date. A dream is simply something you wish would happen. For more than 3 decades, we have wished that legacy door delivery would be converted and modernized. We have seen a decline to virtually no conversions over this period of time. So only with a mandate will the Postal Service actually do these. But more importantly, secure storage is something that Americans want, and this is a process to get it. I might add that this bill does not envision only urban areas built before 1974, but in fact recognize, and those looking at the 2 secure boxes in the back, the one on the right is designed very much for people who may already have curb delivery, but in fact do not want to bear the cost of a large package receipt area in front of their home or down the road. The intended areas, secure storage, would be both urban and rural, because rural delivery often has the same exact problem. A large package arrives, a small mailbox is what is down there at the corner of their house. In rural areas, it may in fact be not within sight of the home, but clusters far down the road. Any American who has driven through rural America realizes that some people don't get to see their mailbox from their home. They too need secure storage. The Postal Service, in order to offer the kind of service that Amazon needs to have and other package shippers, particularly Internet shippers, need to have that. Without it, too many packages are lost or stolen. Too many people are unwilling to bear that. So this bill is designed to both offer a service that promotes the Post Office and save money. Additionally, there will be other amendments offered later in the day that will cost money. It is our hope that by combining the savings, some of those cost amendments could be ruled in order and accepted. So with that, does the gentleman still reserve?
I withdraw my point of order, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to be heard on
the gentleman is recognized.
First of all, I want to thank the Chairman for addressing the issue of costs. I think American people are complaining over and over again about paying more over and over in taxes, everything. So they're getting very, very frustrated. So this would be another cost. At the same time, though, I will not be supporting the amendment because, again, I think when you're talking about the 15 million addresses being changed over 10 years, that's my concern. But again, I want to thank the Chairman because I think we all need to be very sensitive to our constituents paying money for a service that's helpful to them, of course, but at the same time coming out of their limited budgets. Thank you very much.
Would my friend yield?
Sir, of course.
I thank the distinguished ranking member. I am supportive of the Cummings amendment. I cannot be supportive of the Chairman's amendment to the amendment. I have said many times before at this dais, for those who live in older urban parts of the United States, especially in the East Coast, such as those represented by Mr. Cummings and my friend Mr. Lynch, who represents my parents. They are his constituents. There is no place to put these boxes. There is no land. We have 0 lot lines. There's the house, there's the sidewalk, and there's the curb and the street. I even imagine my parents' neighborhood in Boston. You'd have to go to the highway to find land in the medium strip where you might put those. And that would endanger people trying to get their mail because they'd have to cross a busy, dangerous highway. And so I certainly appreciate the Chairman's desire to try to find opportunities to save money. I think there are some more obvious candidates like the prepayment requirement. But to put this burden on folks who live in older urban areas is simply unacceptable. And, you know, as we have expressed on this committee concern for impacts of so-called reform on rural areas, I certainly hope my friends who represent rural areas would have the same consideration and concern for those who live in older urban areas. And I just don't think the cluster box idea is one that is suitable or appropriate for those older urban areas, and would create great hardship on the folks who live in those areas. So reluctantly, I cannot support the Chairman's amendment to the amendment, but I certainly appreciate his desire to try to identify additional savings that may make sense for the Post Office. And I thank my friend for yielding.
Reclaiming my time, I just want to ask the Chairman just one question. Mr. Chairman, I think Ms. Connolly makes a good point. I mean, in neighborhoods like mine, which is only 40 miles away from here, there is no place to put these boxes. And I just would like the Chairman just to address that issue since he raised it.
I thank the gentleman. With 37.8 million homes that get in the chute delivery, 1.5 million of those per year, less than half of them at the end of 10 years, we certainly would recognize that some communities are easier and harder. I think anecdotally, let me give you an example, because I think you were very generous in the examples, and the gentleman talking about Boston was very generous. Just a few miles from here, just east of the river, inside the District of Columbia, is a community that was built shortly after World War II. I've walked up 35 stairs to a home that's built up there, in which there is it's not a chute in the door, but it's a little box to the upper right of the door. Every day, the postman walks up and down, not just that, but tens of homes along that row. Now, the front yard is 32 steps up and 60 feet back. These homes were built just after the war on a beautiful hillside. And as you go around these loops, and this is not a prestigious area, these are working class kind of homes, but as we know, the District of Columbia, there are no inexpensive homes anymore. Several members of City Council live there. Their trash cans are at the bottom of the hill, because there's no way for a trashman to come up the hill. So those large blue and gray containers are at the bottom of the hill, and they've carved out little areas. But their mailboxes are still at the top of the hill. A postman, winter and summer, walks up and down 32 stairs, plus or minus, depending on each of these homes. There is absolutely no failure to have, if you will, plenty of room to put in a cluster box or even an old-fashioned, just down at the bottom of the hill door. It was one of the recognitions that we have certainly areas that are very difficult, but we also have areas that were very simple that have never been implemented. The little stairs going up and down those have been neglected for a generation. The inefficiency is huge. More importantly, when they walk up with that package and set it on the stoop, it's available for thieves. So do I know of examples, as the gentleman from Massachusetts recognized? Absolutely. And it's one of the reasons that our goal over 10 years is only, I'm sorry, from Virginia.
I am from Massachusetts.
Jerry, the problem is you're always giving us your Boston roots. But the gentleman from Virginia.
And I love the Red Sox, too. Mr. Clay,
this is an election season. I suggest you revise and extend that.
No. That's in your DNA.
Thanks, Jerry. But I think the gentleman is absolutely correct. Is it possible that our goal of 1.5 million per year, our mandate, if you will, in the first year is easy to do, and by the 10th year could be hard to do? Absolutely. But I think unless we set the goal in a way that really causes it to be done, we won't get the efficiencies, but we also won't get that community just down the street that begs for a secure cluster box, a place in which the neighbors walk their garbage back and forth every day, walk to get their cars because these particular homes don't have garages, and they walk to the street where their car is. They walk to, and by the way, there are some older folks that live there. So recognizing that the gentleman is absolutely right, both gentlemen are right, that we cannot convert over the foreseeable future all of these homes, but recognizing that the 1% of all deliveries in the first year will be a good start, and 1% in the second year will be a good start. The hope is that this committee, on an ongoing basis over this decade, will evaluate and find out whether at some point a waiver or a stop should go into effect. My strong belief is that everyone who lives in a home that believes it could not be converted also knows of another home that would be pretty easy to convert. Lastly, because, and I'm taking a lot of time, but this is a chance to tell a story. I grew up in Cleveland Heights, Ohio, so I'm an Indians and a Browns fan. I grew up on in two homes, two modest homes, all of which had tree lawns, all of which have the Devil's Strip out in front. Just down the street, we all had a mailbox that we dropped the mail into, and we all had shoot delivery. So in Cleveland Heights, Ohio, at 3637 Annisdale, and at 27,000 Shirley in Euclid, Ohio, those homes built in the 30s and the 50s are still getting door delivery, and they absolutely positively don't fit the model of your Boston or your Baltimore older homes. These were homes that were built in the classic suburban way. So I agree with the gentleman. There will be millions of homes that will be extremely difficult and may not see the kinds of initial cluster boxes we're looking at for a generation. It's one of the reasons that there will be over 20 million homes that will be exempted at the end of this 10-year period. And I thank the gentleman so much for yielding. Are there any further? If no one else seeks recognition, the question
on the further amendment.
The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I just want to start off with your further amendment. And words are important, so I'm just reading your amendment. It says to strike all after, quote, upon application of the Postal Service, and insert, shall offer all patrons served by a delivery point to be converted. That's a typo, right? We're not saying a point.
That is a typo.
Okay. All right.
That's why we always get those technical and correct.
All right. I just wanted to be clear on that.
Thank you.
So just for the record, I oppose the further amendment. And the reason I do so is with all due respect, sir, I think you're arguing against yourself. The flexibility that we do see in various areas across the country are accommodated by Mr. Cummings' amendment, and the mandatory 15 million addresses that have to be converted, that's a hard number. That's a hard number over 10 years, as you've pointed out. The other thing I want to look, the addresses are in the cities. The addresses are in the cities: New York, Houston, Boston, Chicago, Baltimore, Los Angeles. That's where the addresses are. For you to get 15 million out of the 38 million that we have nationally right now, you have to go into the urban areas. You have to. There's just there are not enough addresses in the rural areas and suburban areas to meet your number. So you're talking about going into urban areas, and under your amendment, it says that the Postal Service has to give those people an option. It could be a lousy option. It could be an infeasible option. It could be an unworkable option. But as long as the Post Office gives them an option, the Postal Service will bear the costs. But if it's an unworkable option and they can't accept it, then the alternative for those people living in urban areas is to pay for door delivery. And that's the game here. That's the game here, to make all these people pay to have their mail delivered. That's the bottom line. That's the way this thing works, just so we're all up front about it. And I just think it's a lousy idea. I think these boxes that you're showing, to do this, to do enough boxes for 15 million people is a huge, huge expense. And that's just the boxes themselves, never mind the land takings. In our urban areas, you would have to knock down buildings in South Boston and Dorchester and in Brockton and Quincy that I represent in order to put cluster boxes in so people can walk down the street and get their mail. We've got an aging population here. I don't see how seniors are going to be well served by having to walk a quarter of a mile to go get their mail given the fact that they're senior citizens, that they may be exposed not only to the weather and inconveniences that were raised by the gentlelady from Illinois, but also in some of these urban areas, it's plainly not safe for elderly to be walking out, several blocks to go get their mail, especially during the winter. So I just think this is look, I support the gentleman from Maryland's amendment, and I oppose the further amendment. And I think we're just going in the wrong direction here. It's very costly. You're not saving any money. And I don't know what the bottom line is here, other than forcing people to pay to have their mail delivered. We used to just put a stamp on something, and it got delivered. Now we're going to have another. The stamp will get it to your post office, and then to have it delivered to your house, you're going to have another. This is a tax. This is a delivery tax. That's exactly what this is. And you ought to be honest about it. I yield back.
Gentleman yield.
I'll yield.
I just want to, you just said something. I want to make sure I'm clear on this. In my block, where I live, in Baltimore, we have row houses. I mean, as a matter of fact, I'd say 95% of the houses are row houses. And there's nowhere to put the boxes. I mean,
just a clarification. I live in a row house. Your house is attached to the next house, right?
Right.
Okay, I just want to be clear.
Yeah. In other words, in my block, there are like 32 houses in a row, all attached. So you know what your neighbors are doing. I mean, so anyway, but I'm just asking, is it similar in your situation? I'm just trying to figure out where you put them. That's all.
Right. We would have to pick a couple of houses and knock them down, and I don't know how you go through that process. But I just think that the gentleman from Maryland's amendment would give the Postal Service the flexibility to pick those areas where this could work, because there are, no doubt about it, there are some. There aren't 15 million, but there are some areas where this might work. I say we give them a directive to actively and vigorously pursue those areas that can be converted to cluster boxes, and then leave it at that.
Would the gentleman further yield?
I would, yeah.
I agree with many of the things you just said. I agree that there are homes that will be impractical. Again, I did mention 27,000 Shirley Avenue in Euclid, 3637 Annisdale in Cleveland Heights. I could also mention 5630 Grand Place in Willoughby. Now, that house looks very much like the previous two. The difference was it was built after 1974. One of the challenges that I think we all face is that we've had that request for vigorous conversion for decades, since the 70s, and we found that the Post Office simply hasn't done them. The Postal Service hasn't done them.
Would the gentleman just yield
yes,
briefly? I think if you incentivize it, incentivize the Post Office to do that, where that is possible.
And I think the gentleman has a point, but let me suggest there's an incentive. The median age of the letter carriers is 60 years old. A great many of them have asked when there will be an incentive for their retirement. They can't be laid off or fired, but they can be encouraged to retire, and many of them are still delivering in their late 60s and 70s.
I had a bill to give them an early out to the letter carriers.
Right, and we got to pay for that.
Right.
This bill has a $73 one-time cost to put in a cluster box where appropriate, and a $200 per point, $73, and $200 per year of savings, meaning that in the first year alone, it saves over $100. That goes a long way toward a letter carrier getting a payoff that is fully paid for out of this conversion. And that's part of what we envision, is continuing to reduce, through efficiency, the need for workers, allowing workers to retire in an orderly fashion, so that a decade from now, we will have a stable workforce delivering efficiently the mail. But more importantly, as package delivery increases, these same neighborhoods, including the ranking members and yours and Mr. Connolly's, are going to be begging for secure storage because they're going to want to not have these things taken. So it's a two-part. Now, in some cases, the box on the right, or one like it, is going to be in a community because they only need secure storage for packages. In some, it will be like the one on the left, where there are both package and mail for secure storage. I fully agree with the gentleman. It is going to be more than a decade before we even begin to look at the hardest of the hard conversions, and it is possible those will go on for the rest of our lives. The question is, when I look at homes that exist today, that have existed since the 40s, that are begging for a cluster box, and in spite of these savings have not occurred, I realize that the goal has to have some teeth in it, and it's the only reason that I can't support the ranking member's amendment as it was originally written, is I believe the goal, at least in those first 2 years, we have to challenge them to find the low-hanging fruit. I would share with the gentleman, again, at the end of this decade, there will be 20 million homes plus that will still not be converted, and I expect that some of them will not be converted in our lifetime, and I thank the gentleman.
No, I just want to make clear, though, you alluded to the fact that somehow if we go forward with this cluster box idea that there would be money for early retirement for letter carriers. That is not in this bill, however.
Well, as you know, if the money is available, it could be, but I will tell you quite frankly.
Well, if you want to do that, we can put that language in this bill that
would the gentleman vote for it if it was in the bill?
I'd be inclined to support that, yeah, I would.
Well, I think you have some other amendments that also cost money that are coming up that we've looked at the drafts of. The intent is, quite frankly, to have this bill paired with other areas because we believe the savings, in fact, should be internally available to the post office either to reduce their deficit or for other long-term changes that they need to make. It is, in fact, the Chair's position that we need to free up money to help the post office go through this transition. And I agree with the gentleman that absolutely those letter carriers have to have an ability to retire and an incentive, which the post office can offer today, but in many cases has a hard time getting the money. And if they have to hire a replacement, if there is no efficiency, they can't pay an inducement to retire and then hire somebody else. There's no payback for the post office in that. I'm sure the gentleman would agree.
Well, we probably should return to regular order. I think we're about 5 minutes over.
Thank you. Does anyone else seek recognition? If not, the motion, the question is on the amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute. All those in favor? What? The ISA amendment. All those in favor say aye. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. The question now is on the amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute offered by the gentleman from Maryland as amended. All those in favor of the amendment as amended, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. You don't like Mr. Cummings' amendment? Just check. Okay. In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The amendment from the gentleman from Maryland as amended is agreed to. Does anyone else seek recognition on an amendment? Steve, this is your opportunity. The clerk will designate which amendment.
Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 4670, offered by Mr. Lynch of Massachusetts.
Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman is recognized to explain his amendment.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, this amendment would add the text of my legislation, H.R. 961, the United States Postal Service Stabilization Act, to the underlying bill. This legislation has received the support of over 160 members of Congress, including 10 Republicans, and has been endorsed by a variety of postal stakeholders. In particular, my amendment would address the billions of dollars in overpayment that the Postal Service has made into the Federal Employee Retirement System, requiring the Office of Personnel Management to recalculate the Postal Service's
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to reserve a point of order.
The gentleman will suspend for just a moment. Which purpose
I'd like to reserve a point of order.
The gentleman reserves a point of order.
Which amendment that was?
Yeah, on that one. Please continue.
A little late on that, but that's all right. It would require the Office of Personnel Management to recalculate the Postal Service FERS surplus using a more accurate actuarial formula, one that is based on the unique position, salary growth, and demographic characteristics of our dedicated and wonderful postal workforce. As reported by the Office of the Postal Service Inspector General in September last year, The use of so-called postal-specific assumptions in calculating the Federal Employee Retirement System overpayment would result in a $12.5 billion surplus. Now, there's money we could use for an early retirement for some of these postal workers. Under the amendment, it would be returned to the Postal Service in order to afford the agency the opportunity to pay down its existing debt. I would note that during a recent hearing held by our subcommittee on the U.S. Postal Service in March of this year, we received key testimony in support of this postal-specific approach. Mr. Frank Tedisco, the Chief Actuary at the Government Accountability Office, confirmed that the use of postal-specific assumptions in calculating the amount of the Postal Service FERS overpayment would result in a more accurate number than the government-wide formula that is currently used by the Office of Personnel Management. Similarly, Mr. Jeffrey Williams, Executive President and Chief of Human Resources at the Postal Service, elaborated on why it is critical to use postal-specific characteristics in this calculation. This is a quote. From our perspective, using assumptions that match our workforce and our demographics, given we are self-sustaining and self-funding, makes sense when you think about what true long-term liability and obligation is. So we support using the salary growth and demographic assumptions to calculate the FERS payment. After noting that close quote, after noting that the Postal Service cannot currently realize any financial benefit from its FERS surplus, Mr. Tedisco from GAO added that his agency would support a one-time transfer of the surplus in order to allow the agency to pay down its existing debt. Mr. Chairman, this amendment would immediately enhance the financial viability of the Postal Service at no cost to the American taxpayer and without degrading Postal Service. This path to postal reform is also the subject of agreement between members of both sides of the aisle, as well as among postal stakeholders, including our postal employee unions and associations, our mailers, and the Postal Service itself. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment, and I yield the balance of my time.
I would ask my friend to yield.
I'll yield to the gentleman from Virginia.
I thank the gentleman. I just want to add my voice. I thank him for his thoughtful approach. You know, when we're talking about postal reform, why not deal with the obvious? This is one of the two major things we could do that would alleviate an enormous financial burden artificially imposed on the USPS. There may be other ideas that make lots of sense, and frankly, cluster boxes in some parts of America may make sense. But let's go for the obvious, and I will have an amendment on the prepayment requirement in just a little bit. But this is a very thoughtful approach that would make a substantial difference in the operations of the Postal Service and would substantially affect positively the bottom line. So I thank Mr. Lynch for his leadership, and I yield back to my friend from Massachusetts.
Okay, I recognize myself in opposition.
I'm just controlling my time.
The gentleman still has time.
I yield to the gentleman from Missouri.
Of course.
Just very quickly, Mr. Chairman, I mean, you have talked about trade-offs and how we get to a point where we are making positive change for the Postal Service. My friend from Texas, I would hope that he would continue to use some reservations about objecting to the amendment. This amendment and the amendment to come may be the trade-off for getting broad support for the underlying bill. And we should think about it because it's about dollars and cents. It's about the bottom line. It's about how we save money for the Postal Service and how we keep it a viable service for the American people. So I'm willing to entertain some of what you've discussed.
I thank the gentleman. I now recognize myself. I believe the gentleman from Texas, his point of order will be that it's not germane, but I'd like to speak in favor of the gentleman's amendment before that question, and that is that, first of all, Mr. Lynch, if this were attached to the bill and paid for out of the cluster conversion, would you be in favor of the overall bill?
Explain that. I'm not.
In other words, what you're asking for costs money, and it is in the comprehensive bill.
Wait a minute. We've generated a surplus because of the hours that the postal workers have worked under their contract.
It's scored.
So
reclaiming
I know there's a scoring element to this,
right.
but in fact, this is money that has been generated because of the hardworking people at the
No.
Post Office. They have worked
And
these
Rick-
hours under their contract. They have overfunded their Federal employee retirement obligations. So that money is there.
Right.
I know that I know as an accounting matter.
Reclaiming my time to
Okay, go ahead.
hopefully make the point, and I'll recognize you for a time we need, but this has a score. In order to do it, we have to find an offset, because we're looking at an agency that's lost $1.9 billion last quarter. So the question really was, I agree that there are some excesses on one side, and actually there's some deficits in other accounts. In our overall bill, as you know, we made this conversion, which I don't have a score for, but we know it scores.
It doesn't score. It doesn't. This is a Treasury. This is internal to Treasury. It's one account to another account. It's internal.
Yeah, I apologize for disagreeing with you.
You don't have to. We disagree all the time. You don't have to apologize.
No, but here's the problem. Your side is scoring this. This side is scoring this one way, and it's an interesting way, but it's not what your bill does. If you refund it against the debt, in other words, you simply reduce that amount and you move it against the $15 billion that is owed, there's no score at that time. But it's the moment the Post Office gets to use that revolving fund again, and they would, it would go right back up again. So if we were to reduce the line of credit from $15 billion by the amount of this, you'd be right. But then there'd be no benefit to those hardworking people, and there would be no new funds available. So the inevitability that refunding this money to the Post Office, making it available for programs the Post Office would like to do that it is losing money on and can't reform, all gets us back to the same point. This one creates a pocket of money that would be consumed for the benefit of the postal workers, no question at all. The challenge is we have to figure out ways to pay for it. So again, if this were able to be in a comprehensive or a mini bill, if you will, would that cause you to support the provisions of the bill that's before you today?
If this amendment were accepted, it would make me more inclined to support the bill than if it were defeated.
Well, we're going to continue to want to have you more declined. But I think Mr. Clay said it very well. We may have to put together a package of things that your side of the aisle wants that are appropriate, and I see many of them, and savings that we believe we need to have, such as this conversion of a fraction of the homes that are legacy homes, and that's our goal. So although I think the gentleman from Texas is going to insist on his point of order, there is nothing that stops us from coming to an agreement that includes today's bill, perhaps other bills that we brought before the committee, including the comprehensive bill, and coming to an agreement on a package that can be passed on the floor. And I very much want to make sure that the gentleman's amendment, although not germane today, I don't believe, is included in any compromise so that, in fact, we give the Postal Service the kinds of reforms and breathing room that they tell us they need. And to your point, those hard workers who deserve to have the Post Office have the maximum ability to reform while treating them fairly. And I yield to the ranking member.
Very briefly, Mr. Chairman, in light of what was just said, what about withdrawing the bill and then trying to come up with something more in tune with what you just said?
I appreciate reclaiming my time. As you know, this bill is substantially similar to a piece of the comprehensive bill. The goal today is to look at secure delivery in a way in which we can pass a secure delivery bill. I have every intention on this. As you know, we did the 2 bills related to bypass mail in Alaska. 5-day question, which may be taken up separately, and I've encouraged leadership to do that because it scores and it can be used very effectively to help all of America. But everything is on the table. Every bill that has been passed, including this one, will be on the table for a conference on this side leading to a conference on the other side. My view is today's bill is a tool by defining narrowly what America should be getting in the way of secure storage. And if no one objects, I'd further yield to the gentleman from Missouri.
Mayor,
Of course.
Mr. Chairman and the ranking member, perhaps we should entertain a suggestion that the subcommittee go back to work and actually come up with proposals from each side and bring it to the full committee to consider. I mean, I would be in favor of that. I don't know how the ranking member or the chairman feel about that, but I think we could make an honest effort to come up with a comprehensive piece of legislation. And I don't know how the chairman of the subcommittee feels about it, but
Mr. Chairman,
I'd like to take a stab at it.
Well, and I appreciate that. What I would suggest to the gentleman and to the entire committee is we go through the secure storage today because there's a number of other amendments that I think should be heard that have not been previously heard. We have another bill, which is the President's budget, which, quite candidly, I polled all the members of both sides of the aisle, and I could not get one minority member to support the President's budget. But with that as a tool to come back up, and it's much broader. It includes a number of areas. I would be more than happy for the subcommittee to begin the work using that, adding to it any aspect of comprehensive, taking away if that leads to a consensus or a bill that we can pass. So I would suggest that we complete today's work, which I think we're about three-quarters of the way through, and then use that tool, because I think the President's budget, in spite of no one endorsing it in its current form on the minority side, is the best place to start, because we know the administration supports that. And at the end of the day, the administration could lead to the Senate's support of some of those elements. So I think the gentleman's suggestion is good, and I would suggest that we use that as our tool.
Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm not quite sure whose time we're on, but I just wanted to say—
We're on the time of comedy.
All right. Well, I thank the Chair. I just want to say to my friend from Missouri, I would love to see comprehensive postal reform that puts the USPS on a sound fiscal footing and creates a new business model for the 21st century. But I think it's really important that we acknowledge there are fundamental differences philosophically between us on what that model might be and what the role of the Postal Service ought to be. We can't easily bridge the gaps on issues like 6 days versus 5 days. I have a resolution, bipartisan resolution, that would mandate 6 days, not give up that competitive advantage. We now have 217 co-sponsors on HRS 30 to do that. The other side has repeatedly voted for legislation that would virtually mandate going from 6 to 5 in some fashion or another. The White House has supported that position. The Chairman is right about that. We disagree. When we had OMB here, the representative of OMB was informed that Democrats weren't going to support that, and a lot of Republicans aren't going to support that. We disagree about cluster boxes. We disagree about prepayment. We just disagreed about Steve Lynch's FERS fix.
I thought we were agreeing so well up to this point.
Well, but that's okay, but we can't pretend we don't have fundamental differences about the future course of the Postal Service, and we need to somehow find a way to bridge that, or we are going to remain gridlocked here in the House and in the Senate. That's why legislation hasn't moved for 4 years.
And, Mr. Chairman, in response to my friend from Virginia, let me explain to you what's at stake here. What is really at stake here is the future and the viability of the U.S. Postal Service. Now, that means that both sides are going to have to give in some. Both sides are going to have to get to a point of being reasonable in order to serve the one service that all Americans appreciate, which is the U.S. Postal Service, because they are reliable. And we need to grow up, become adults, and realize each side is going to have to give something. If not, then you will see the collapse of the U.S. Postal Service, and it will be on all of our watch. And it will be because of our inaction that we don't save the system. And look, I'd rather salvage it than to do nothing.
I think that no one could say it better. Thank you. We now recognize the gentleman from Florida.
Well, Mr. Chairman, and respectfully, Mr. Lynch, I have to adamantly oppose any transfer of any so-called projected surpluses from FERS. Let me say, this is offered by the other side of the aisle, and in candor and disclosure, I have opposed. I remember when Mr. Gingrich tried to raid the D.C. retirement funds with this alleged surplus, and I will adamantly oppose this Republican, Democrat amendment or any Republican amendment that takes these funds here. We have made an obligation to these people. We are not going to solve the post office's problems by stealing money from the pension fund. These pension funds historically have had huge swings, as much as $10 billion in a year. You're looking at one of the probably the greatest, if you look at the demographics of our employment population of Federal employees, you have more aging people and retiring people, and you're going to inherit huge obligations, both for FERS. When we changed out CRS, the Civil Service Retirement System, in the mid-'80s, we had an obligation to those people, and there's still hundreds of thousands of them. That is a $17 billion deficit at last time I checked. So don't play with money for employees. And the people who allegedly represent the union members and hard workers in the post office should adamantly be opposing any attempts to take a penny from any pension fund, period. That is not the way we are going to solve this problem, and I will do everything possible to defeat anybody's effort, either side of the aisle, to go in and raid a penny from these pension funds. So maybe I didn't make it clear. I get pretty heated about this, but do not mess with those pension funds. And I know you're well-intended. You're trying to find money to save the postal system. Don't do it this way. I yield back the balance of my time. Thanks for yielding.
I thank the gentleman. The gentleman insists on his point of order.
While I may disagree a little bit with my friend Mr. Mike, I think Mr. Lynch and the other side has a good point that we need to come to a compromise, use modern actuarial methods to determine these payments. But unfortunately, this proposal is not germane to a bill that deals with secure delivery. So under House Rule 16, Clause 7, I'm going to really push for my point of order here, sir.
Gentleman, withdraw.
If you feel it is not germane, you can rule it.
Right. I'm prepared to rule. The amendment is on a subject different than the underlying bill. The amendment is not germane and is not in order under House Rule 16, Clause 7. Okay. Does anyone else seek to offer an amendment?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I have another amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report.
And until I want to don't want to be late on this one. I want to reserve the point of order.
The gentleman reserves.
Amendment to the amendment.
You'll bracket early and late.
In the nature of a substitute to H.R. 4670, offered by Mr. Lynch of Massachusetts.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman is recognized to explain his amendment as it's being distributed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, this amendment would simply strike the so-called legacy door delivery service section included in the underlying bill. In its current form, the legislation offered by the Chairman provides that, quote, the Postal Service may continue to provide, comma, for a fee to be paid for by the addressee, and, comma, door delivery to an address that received door delivery as of January 1, 2014, but was converted or scheduled to be converted to a different primary mode of mail delivery, end quote. So this is what I was talking about before. You have an option for people whose door delivery is being taken away. If they don't like the option they're being given, they can pay to have their mail delivered to their door, which they have now included in the cost of the stamp. In other words, postal customers whose addresses will be subject to a transition to curbside, sidewalk, or cluster box delivery pursuant to the requirements of the legislation. We're talking about the 15 million people, 15 million addresses, I'm sorry. This legislation must pay a legacy fee in order to retain their current door delivery service. During previous testimony before our committee, Postmaster General Donahoe has acknowledged that changes in customer service, quote, are probably the biggest thing that upsets customers, close quote. Given that the underlying bill already requires the phase-out of door delivery for 15 million addresses, I would add that this legacy fee provision simply adds insult to injury and will only serve to upset postal customers to a greater extent by asking them to bear the cost of retaining the very customer service feature that is being eliminated. It is also reflective of a misguided approach to postal reform that fails to consider the long-term business impact of significant and noticeable degradations in customer service. So I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support my amendment to strike the legacy fee section in the underlying legislation, and I yield.
Would the gentleman yield?
I sure will.
If this is passed, would the gentleman support the underlying bill?
As I said before, if this passes, I would be more inclined to support the underlying bill than I would otherwise be.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how much more? I thank the gentleman.
All right.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you very much. I'd like to.
I would have yielded to you. Thought I had some more time left.
You do. If
I was going to yield to the gentleman from Illinois.
Of course.
Please. Thank you.
2 minutes.
Great discussion, and we have all of these wonderful ideas that bring us
Speaking of Mike, Dan.
to where we might be trying to go. I just want to indicate that I support this Lynch amendment just as I supported the other one had it been allowed. And they're both common sense amendments that bring us closer to an agreement that we might be able to reach. And I simply commend him for his thoughtfulness, and I yield back.
Thank the gentleman.
You're yielding back?
I do yield back at this time.
Thank you. The gentleman from Texas.
Thank you very much. And some of our initial discussions of postal reform and moving to secure delivery in cluster boxes actually started out as we were going to just make everybody do it. And one of the proposals to potentially lessen the impact was the idea was this was to save money. Well, if it didn't cost any additional money to deliver to someone's slot in their door, then there's no reason to do this. So I said, look, if you want to pay for that, you can get that premium service. Just like in Corpus Christi, the town I live in, you've got to set your garbage cans out on the curb of the street. But if you're willing to pay extra, they'll come pull them from actually inside of your yard. So the idea here was to lessen the impact of this. We've come up with a solution for those that fall under the definitions with the Americans with Disability Act, and we've expanded that based on Mrs. Duckworth's amendment. But what we're doing with the language to allow people to buy out of it is we're able to get those savings and not decrease the service. But most people like me, it do me good to walk a block to pick up my mail every day. But it's not, that's not the purpose here. The purpose here is to come up with a financially viable system for the post office. So I oppose the amendment because you're really taking door delivery away from more people by doing this amendment. And I get the impression from the folks on the other side of the aisle that you wouldn't like to see door delivery taken away from anybody.
Would my friend yield?
Absolutely.
I thank my friend. I would just point out to him that his argument would be more compelling if we were introducing a new service. Then you could argue, well, you should pay for that. This is a service that's been, provided for generations. And I would also respectfully suggest to my friend from Texas that if we go down the route of differentiating now, all of a sudden, services and charging a special fee for those, a delivery tax, I will say to my friend from Texas, it will not be long before we start to examine the cost of rural delivery, which are much higher than in urban and suburban areas, and maybe we should be considering fees for that since the cost is different. And I don't think we want to go down that road. I think as Mr. Lacy Clay said, this is a service our Americans have come to rely on, and we have to tread carefully when we start to change the terms and conditions of those services that have been provided forever, and start to look at a fee schedule that differentiates one geographic area from another. I thank my friend for yielding.
Would the gentleman yield?
I will.
You know, I think the gentleman's point would be good, except that 91 million people don't get the service that 38 million people do get. So your point is an interesting one, but what you really have is 91 million. The vast majority of people listening to or watching this on C-SPAN, the tens of people watching it right now, the fact is, well, they're in our offices, our staff. But the fact is that the vast majority of people don't get this service. But I think the point that Mr. Farenthold would make very vigorously, chairing the subcommittee, is we all hear this repeated thing. We need to have new services. We need to have revenue. 91 million people don't get door delivery. The people who would get door delivery because they wanted it and willing to pay for it, and I would support even those 91 million, this is a new revenue service if they're able to recover those costs. So if you want to run it like a business, I can tell you that the difference between one level of service and another on United Airlines, which I fly every week, I don't get to fly first class for the same price as coach, and there's a reason for it. It's a business, and they charge for differences. 91 million homes don't get this service, and to strike this provision is to strike the ability for those who want a premium service to get it. And to me, that doesn't make any sense as a businessman.
In reclaiming my time, it's a service we can't afford anymore with the Postal Service losing billions of dollars. It's not unheard of to reduce the service. When I was growing up, the Borden milkman came by my house every week and delivered milk. Now I go by the grocery store every week to pick up milk, and it's just an evolution. Even though we've had the service for generations, we've got a shifting time and a shifting economy. And I see my time's expired, and I urge my colleagues to oppose this amendment.
And does the gentleman withdraw his
And I
reserve?
withdraw my point of order. It's clearly germane.
The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Lynch. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. No. In the opinion of the Chair, the noes have it. The noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. Are there any further amendments? The gentleman formerly from Massachusetts, now from Virginia, Mr. Connolly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Red Sox fan.
And a Red Sox fan. But remember one thing about the Red Sox. We wish all other teams well, with one exception. So
we can't say D in front of Yankees.
So
the clerk will read the amendment.
Mr. Chairman, may I just make the point before the I have two, and if the Chairman wishes, I'll just go ad seriatim.
That's fine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 4670, offered by Mr. Connolly of Virginia.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to reserve a point of order.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman is recognized for his amendment.
I do want to say to my friend from Texas and the Chairman,
wait a second. The clerk will designate the second amendment. He wants to do them en banc.
And where are you?
Or serially. Is that allowed? Okay. Just 1 minute. She's going to read the second amendment.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 4670, offered by Mr. Connolly of Virginia.
The gentleman is recognized.
I thank the Chair.
I'll reserve point of order on both.
And I just want to express my admiration for the telepathy between the Chairman and the gentleman from Texas, understanding the point of order. Mr. Chairman, my amendment provides an opportunity for the committee to once and for all reject proposals seeking to eliminate 6-day mail delivery. The so-called reform represents precisely the type of what I think are short-sighted, quick-fix service cuts that chase questionable immediate savings in exchange for lower quality services and products. I think it is ill-advised to have this kind of trade-off that will result in fewer customers, lower net revenues, and will necessitate even greater cuts. A vicious death spiral that will culminate in the privatization or outright destruction of the U.S. Postal Service. I happen to believe 6 days a week is a competitive advantage that needs to be used and exploited by the Postal Service to grow business. According to the Postal Regulatory Commission, eliminating 6-day mail service would delay 25% of all first-class mail, often by 2 days or more. So it has a ripple effect, not related directly to whether mail is delivered Saturday, that affects other mail service. Eliminating Saturday mail delivery would also have real-world consequences and could threaten the ability of seniors, especially in rural areas, to be able to receive their drugs on time and other services, and damaging countless private sector businesses, a multi-billion-dollar set of businesses in private sector that create jobs for America. As business representatives have repeatedly pointed out in testimony before our committee and others, 6-day mail service is a competitive advantage, not a liability. The amendment simply codifies a policy that's been in place for 3 decades, running to ensure that USPS can continue to meet the universal service standard as our nation moves into the 21st century. And as I pointed out, we have a companion resolution, HRES 30, which now has 217 co-sponsors on a bipartisan basis. And I strongly urge my colleagues to support this amendment, although I strongly suspect it's about to be ruled out of order.
Would the gentleman yield?
Of course.
Before that possibility occurs, I just want to comment. Obviously, I don't support making permanent a level of service that even the administration opposes. However, in the case of the pre-funding, this pre-funding is, again, likely not germane, but it's broader than the administration supports. And I would note that we do, as a bipartisan, I think, effort, support the extending and the changing of the pre-funding to make it consistent with what the administration, and to be honest, the Postal Service would like to do. So I know the gentleman also supports the extension to make the pre-funding over the 4 decades less onerous and more accurate to the actuarial. So I'm a little confused. If I could ask the gentleman why he would eliminate it altogether rather than what has been previously negotiated on re-amortizing it.
You're asking about the next amendment.
Well, we're considering them together, but the health care pre-funding, why you would repeal it altogether rather than re-amortize it consistent with what the Post Office says it should be, which is a significantly lower figure per year.
I guess we're giving up on my 6-day amendment. Well, I guess I would say to the Chair,
you said you were going to do them. We've called them both up.
No, I agree. And I'd like an opportunity to talk to the Second Amendment, but I think that we need to start over. I think that the action incorporated in the legislation adopted in lame duck in 2006 did 2 very injurious things to the Postal Service. One is this prepayment requirement that I think we need to go back to the drawing board. And my friend Mr. Clay from Missouri suggested we do just that, and this issue should be on that table. Now, we're going to have a scoring problem, but I would say to the Chair, and I think he would not be unsympathetic to this point of view, we can't let bean counters drive all of our legislation here. We have to figure out how to make the Postal Service a going concern. The prepayment thing is the most obvious elephant in the room. It just takes up so much space. And I'm certainly open to other refinements, but I guess my starting point would be let's repeal what we did in 2006 because it was wrong. Perhaps people thought, I wasn't here then, that it was a good government reform measure that would put some strength and discipline into the Postal Service, but it's been ruinous and has created enormous red ink hemorrhaging. And so that's my intent, Mr. Chairman. And I certainly am more than willing to look at permutations and refinements and other approaches, but I start with that one at this time because I think we have to clean up the books.
I thank the gentleman.
I thank the Chair. Mr. Chairman, well, I'm sorry, how does the Chair wish to proceed?
Since I'm going to hear the germane question next, if the gentleman has any further comments on either of the 2 amendments, I'd hear them now.
I guess I just sort of talked to my Second Amendment as well, and I would now yield.
Thank you for supporting the Second Amendment. The gentleman will state his objection.
Again, I raised a question as to the germaneness, raised a point of order with respect to the germaneness. The number of days of delivery doesn't relate to the secure delivery, nor does pre-funding of health care benefits. I do think both of these issues need to be discussed on the merits, and I think it's something that Mr. Lynch and I can work on within the subcommittee and perhaps come up with something we can, none of us like, but we can all live with. And so I'm going to insist upon the point of order at this point.
I thank the gentleman. I'm prepared to rule.
I just wanted to thank my colleague. I understand his role, but he's always been gracious to me. I'm not a member of the subcommittee, though I wish I could be, and he's always accommodated me at his hearings and in Postal Service related and Federal employee related issues, and I thank him for his courtesy. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman. I'm prepared to rule, and I rule the amendment is on a subject different than the underlying bill. The amendment is not germane. Neither of the amendments are germane, and it is not ruled in order under House Rule 16, Clause 7. Are there any further amendments? If there are no further amendments, the question now occurs on the amendment in the nature of a substitute as amended. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any noes?
No.
In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The amendment in the nature of substitute is agreed to. I now move the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform report the bill H.R. 4670 to the House with the recommendation it do pass as amended. The question is on favorably reporting H.R. 4670 to the House as amended. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Just like Baptist Church on Sunday. Any opposed? No.
No.
In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The gentleman requests a recorded vote. Pursuant to the rules, the recorded vote will be delayed. The Chair announces it will be delayed until 10 minutes after the vote that will occur on the floor at approximately 2 o'clock. So we'll go with the other business and be aware to be back here immediately following the floor votes, so there's a time specific for everyone to be there for that recorded vote. And with that, I have the pleasure of having the committee now consider H.R. 2750, the Design, Build, Efficiency, and Jobs Act of 2013. The clerk will please designate the bill.
H.R. 2750, a bill to amend Title 41, United States Code to require the use of two-phase selection procedures when design-build contracts are suitable for award to small business concerned and for other purposes.
Without objection, H.R. 2750 will be considered as read and open for amendment at any point. I have an amendment in the nature of a substitute. The clerk will designate the amendment, please.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 2750, offered by Mr. Issa.
Without objection, the amendment will be considered as read and open for amendment at any point. The text has already been distributed and is in each of your folders. I now recognize myself for a short opening statement. In fiscal year 2012, the Federal Government spent over $41 billion on construction and architect and engineering A&E contracts. This represents approximately 8% of the roughly $500 billion of Federal Government spends annually to procure goods and services. Congress needs to ensure that these constructions and A&E contracts are managed by a government in a most efficient and effective manner. H.R. 2750, sponsored by Representative Sam Graves and co-sponsored by several OGR members, including Mr. Farenthold, Mr. Meadows, and Mr. Connolly, would improve the use of the design-build contracting process. Specifically, H.R. 2750 mandates the use of two-phase selection procedures for any design-build requirement with a value of more than $750,000. Further, the bill requires that any contracting officer that selects more than 5 finalists for Step 2 of the design-build process provide written documentation as to why more offers were necessary. Many of you may remember the collapse of the old I-35 westbound Mississippi River Bridge in August of 2007. Using the two-phase design-build selection technique, the Minnesota Department of Transportation was able to efficiently select a contractor that offered the best value and open the new bridge to traffic in less than a year, more than 3 months ahead of schedule, while also achieving the goals of safety, quality, and innovation. Last December, the Subcommittee on the Federal Workforce and the U.S. Postal Service and the Census held a hearing and heard from government and industry experts largely supportive of this legislation. My amendment in the nature of substitute would make the requirement in H.R. 2750 apply government-wide. I urge my colleagues to support the measure, and with that I recognize Mr. Cummings for his opening statement.
Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you for bringing this bipartisan legislation up for consideration. I share the concern that the design-build contracting is hindering competition and efficiency, and this bill addresses these concerns. For that reason, I support the Design-Build Efficiency and Jobs Act. Federal contracts for construction and architectural and engineering services represent approximately 8% or $40 billion of annual Federal spending on goods and services. To procure these services, Federal agencies can use a design-build contract in which design and construction services are combined into a single contract with one company. A frequently used technique for selecting a source for this type of procurement is the two-phase design-build contract. During Phase 1, companies are required to submit information related to experience and past performance. Based on that information, the agency then selects a limited number of most qualified bidders, generally 3 to 5, to advance to Phase 2. At this point, the selected bidders then submit more detailed price and technical proposals for evaluation, which often can be quite expensive and time-consuming. Due to the nature of this process, often only large companies can compete for these contracts. As discussed at the Federal Workforce Subcommittee hearing on this bill, design-build stakeholders have expressed concerns that smaller firms are regularly faced with a dilemma. They must decide whether to spend significant time, effort, and scarce resources to compete for a project that they may have little chance of winning, or to refrain from competing altogether. This bill would mandate the use of two-phase selection procedures for a design-build contract with a value of $750,000 or greater. The bill also would require that any contracting officer selecting more than 5 bidders for Step 2 of the design-build process provide written documentation as to why more bidders are necessary. The head of the agency would be required to approve the waiver. Chairman, I believe that we need to do all that we can in an effort to make the procurement process a fair and affordable one as possible, and this legislation is a step in the right direction. And as to the substitute, Mr. Chairman, this amendment makes technical changes to ensure that the defense and civilian contracts are both covered by this bill. These changes are paramount in guaranteeing that the design-build contracting process is equitable throughout the Federal Government as a whole. As I previously said regarding H.R. 2750, I believe that we need to do all that we can to make the procurement process as fair and affordable as possible, and this amendment, in the nature of a substitute, accomplishes just that. With that, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I'll hold the record open until the end of the day, so any members who wish to may make opening written statements. Does any member wish to speak on the bill?
Mr. Chairman?
Does any member wish to offer an amendment?
Yeah.
I look forward to the gentleman's amendment. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized for 5 minutes. I'm sorry, the clerk will read the amendment. And will.
Amendment offered by Mr. Lynch of Massachusetts to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 2750.
The gentleman is recognized to explain his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you remember, I spent about 20 years in the construction industry, so I'm very familiar with this. I think it's a good step to go to two-step design build processes, but the underlying legislation requires the use of the two-phase or two-step contracting method in the awarding of a Federal design build contract where the agency values the contract at $750,000 or greater. That's a very, very low amount for a very complex process. I think it was entirely suitable for the Mississippi Bridge incident that you contract that you just raised, but for $750,000, that's a very, very low bid, and the process could be as costly as the contract in some cases. Based on concerns that I expressed during a related hearing by our Subcommittee on Federal Workforce in December 2013, my amendment would increase this $750,000 threshold to $3 million in recognition that certain Federal design build contracts will satisfy this $3 million threshold, but may still be more appropriately suited for a one-step contract selection process. This amendment would also allow an agency head the necessary flexibility to approve the use of one-step selection when doing so would serve the best interests of the Federal taxpayer. As I understand, during our subcommittee hearing to examine the use of design-build contracts in the Federal Government, I agree totally with the spirit of the legislation introduced by Mr. Graves of the Small Business Committee, H.R. 2750. I think it's a good idea. The Design-Build Efficiency and Jobs Act seeks to ensure that Federal agencies do not place smaller architecture and design firms at a competitive disadvantage, which is what you raised, especially when compared to the larger design-build teams when awarding contracts for the design and construction of Federal buildings and other government projects. However, from my experience, I do believe that a threshold of $750,000 to trigger the use of two-phase selection in design-build contracting is far too low of a bar and will create a problem where routine, everyday, garden variety Federal projects that are better suited to one-step selection are instead now subject to a very elaborate two-phase and very costly two-phase process for a very small contract price. I would note that my own district includes a number of small restaurants, single-family homes, condos, three-decker housing units whose contract easily exceeds $750,000. That's not how this was originally intended to go. But the construction of those units is very uncomplicated and might just involve 4 workers and a couple of pickup trucks, and you're asking them to go to a two-bid process. So it's highly inefficient. I don't think it gets at what we wanted to get at in the bill, which, again, I agree with the overall spirit of the bill. As a frame of reference, I'd point out the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, we have a high-cost state, admittedly, but the trigger for two-step is $5 million for the use of two-phase selection in design-build projects. The $3 million that we're offering here is sort of I'm splitting the difference between the lower bar of $750,000 included in the underlying bill and the $5 million minimum that may be more appropriate for a high-cost state like Massachusetts. Mr. Chairman, I agree with Mr. Graves and the spirit of this bill, but I think we have set the threshold far too low with the $750,000 trigger. And I just urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support this amendment, and I yield back the balance.
Would the gentleman yield?
I would.
I find this amendment to have a number of good elements, and I'm particularly pleased that the gentleman offered the waiver capability, because I think that essentially undoes some of what the gentleman's specifically concerned with. I also share with the gentleman that a number of $750,000, although it's large, if it's our book, it's not very large in construction. I might suggest, though, that the $1.5 million figure that has been used in other groups is a more consensus number. And I realize that anyone could pick any number. But since you're adding the waiver capability, if you would also be willing to use the 1.5 that's broadly supported by small business as the number they were hoping to achieve, as a friendly amendment, I would be prepared to support the underlying amendment.
I think it's an improvement. I think $3 million is better, but I think what you're suggesting is entirely reasonable, and I'd agree with that as a friendly amendment. Okay.
So without objection, the member's amendment will be struck to 1.5. Is there anyone else? Then I think we're prepared to call the question on your amendment. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed, no. Not a mouse roared. The amendment is agreed to.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Are there any further amendments? If not, if there are no further discussion, the question is on the amendment in the nature of a substitute as amended. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. I move now that the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform report the bill, H.R. 2750, to the House with the recommendation it do pass as amended. The question is on favorably reporting H.R. 2750 to the House as amended. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. H.R. 2750 is ordered reported to the House as amended. I now ask unanimous consent that the staff be authorized to make necessary and conforming technical changes to the bill without objections so ordered. The committee will now consider H.R. 4671, the Public Interest Declassification Board Reauthorization of 2014. The clerk will please designate the bill.
H.R. 4671, a bill to extend the Public Interest Declassification Act of 2000.
Without objection, H.R. 4671 is considered as read and open for amendment at any point. The text has already been distributed and is in each of your folder. As Chair of the Oversight and Government Reform Committee, I am a strong advocate of government transparency. That is why I am proud to bring forward H.R. 4671, the Public Interest Declassification Board Reauthorization Act. One of the consistent challenges faced by the administrations throughout our nation's history has been to strike the right balance between protecting national security and promoting transparency. This challenge has grown exponentially due to the rapid increase in the volume of electronic communications worldwide. Classification is often used intentionally or not as a risk avoidance strategy by agencies and officials. As a result, even slight inherent institutional bias toward overclassification have led to unsustainable increases in the amount of classified documents in recent years. Overclassification unnecessarily hides information from the American people, and it also makes it more difficult to rapidly share information among entities within the Federal Government and with our allies. The Public Interest Declassification Board was created specifically to help address this problem. Its goal is to advocate for the public interest and to promote as full as possible the public's access to significant national security decisions and activities at the earliest possible date. In 2012, the Board released a report entitled Transforming the Security Classification System. The report made 14 recommendations on how to adapt the classification system in a digital age. Since then, the Board has fought to see its recommendations implemented. Several of the recommendations have been incorporated within President Obama's recent Second National Action Plan for Open Government. The bill before us today would reauthorize the PIDB for an additional year. This would move the Board's reauthorization schedule to a non-election year cycle. It is my hope that the Chairman of this committee in the 114th Congress will find ways next year to further enhance the role of the PIDB in transforming classification. In closing, I would ask that all members join with me in supporting this important legislation, and I now recognize the Ranking Member, Mr. Cummings.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I support the reauthorization of the Public Interest Declassification Board. The PIDB is an advisory committee that makes recommendations to the President and the executive branch on the classification and declassification of national security information. The PIDB serves an important role for Congress. For example, it is a place a committee can go to request that records be declassified to aid in congressional oversight. In 2012, the PIBD issued a landmark report that recommended major changes to the classification and declassification systems. The report found that, and I quote, present practices for classification and declassification of national security information are outmoded, unsustainable, and keep too much information from the public, end quote. The President included some of the recommendations from the PIDB's report in his second Open Government National Action Plan, such as establishing a classification reform steering committee. The PIDB does important work, and I support this bill because I support reauthorizing the board. I am concerned, however, that this bill reauthorizes the PIDB for only 1 year. This is an important commission, and it has bipartisan support. There is no need for us to have to scramble in a year to avoid having the authorization elapse. We've heard from the PIDB and that it makes it harder to recruit board members if their authorization status is uncertain. I plan to offer an amendment to reauthorize the board for 3 years rather than just 1. Mr. Chairman, I hope you will support the extension, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I'll hold the record open until the end of the day, so members who would like to submit written statements may. Does any member wish to speak on the bill?
Mr.
Chairman, I have an amendment.
The gentlelady, the clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment to H.R. 4671, offered by Ms. Spear of California.
The gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes to explain her amendment.
Chairman and Ranking Member, thank you. We keep too many secrets, and we keep them too long. The PIDB has been authorized to try and provide us with some level of classification and declassification. To put this in perspective, in 2011, the National Security Agency declassified a cryptology instruction book that was 202 years old. The Berlin Wall actually fell 25 years ago, but the CIA documents about the Berlin Wall from 1962 were only recently declassified. There is a mandate from the President and from Congress to declassify these documents, but for the most part it's been ignored. This particular amendment would be, I think, helpful by strengthening the board and directing the President to take action to enhance the authority and capacity of the board for a stronger government-wide strategy for declassification. This would include requiring each agency to complete annual reviews of records for declassification within a year and to share information about declassification across Federal agencies and with the National Declassification Center. I appreciate the support of both the Chairman and Ranking Member, and I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady. Anyone further wish to speak on the amendment?
I would like to speak on the amendment.
The gentleman is recognized.
Chairman, I support this amendment offered by Representative Spear. This amendment is based on legislation introduced last year by Senators Sheehan and Risch to improve Federal Government's classification system. This amendment includes a common-sense recommendation made by the PIDB in its 2012 report, Transforming the Security Classification System. That recommendation was to enhance the authority of the National Declassification Center. This amendment requires the head of each agency to complete its review of records for declassification within 1 year. An agency can seek written approval from the Director of the National Declassification Center for an additional year. This amendment would also require the head of each agency with classification authority to share the agency's declassification guidance with other agencies and with the National Declassification Center. According to the PIDB's 2012 report, and I quote, "Sharing guidance enables better identification of classified information created by other agencies and results in more accurate referrals." I think, Mr. Chairman, this is a good amendment, and I urge every member to support it. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The Chair also supports the gentlelady's amendment. We believe that it is good and helps the process. And with that, I would call the question on the amendment. All those in favor of the gentlelady from California's amendment to the amendment in nature of substitute signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to.
Chairman, I have an amendment.
Amendment to H.R. 4671 offered by Mr. Cummings.
The gentleman will be the Chair will suspend. The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My amendment is very simple. It would extend the authorization of the PIDB for 3 years until the year 2017. The underlying bill extends the authorization of the Board only through the year 2015. The PIDB was established by Congress in the year 2000. The Board has proven to be an important voice for reforming our classification system and ensuring that more information is made available to the public. I believe we all agree that the Board should be reauthorized. There is no need for us to create uncertainty for the Board by authorizing it only for a year rather than a longer period. We have heard that there may be a desire to add additional authorities or responsibilities to the Board, but that can be done regardless of whether we reauthorize it for 1 year or 3 years. We have legislative jurisdiction over the PIDB, and we can pass legislation at any time to enhance the Board. So, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate you introducing and bringing up the underlying bill, and I hope we can get support for our amendment. With that, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Recognize myself. I'm generally supportive that we want to have as you said, the Board members have some level of certainty. And I would ask if you could withdraw this amendment at this time so the staffs could work out the language of what we expect in addition to going to 3 years, expect from this Board, include it in your amendment, and hopefully bring it back as unanimous consent at around 2 o'clock after the next round of votes.
Chairman, I really appreciate that, and I withdraw.
I thank you. The gentleman withdraws. At this point, we will not call the question on the underlying bill until we return from recess immediately following the last vote. I now call up en bloc H.R. 43, H.R. 451, H.R. 606, H.R. 1671, H.R. 1707, H.R. 1865, H.R. 2112, H.R. 2223, H.R. 2291, H.R. 2678, H.R. 2802, H.R. 3027, H.R. 3085, H.R. 3534, H.R. 4355, and H.R. 4416. It is my intention to consider these bills by unanimous consent. Does any member wish to speak on the bill? The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I support the bills.
Thank you. Yielding back. I ask unanimous consent that the committee favorably report the aforementioned bills. Without objection, the bills are without objection. The aforementioned bills are approved. Okay. I ask unanimous consent the committee favorably report the aforementioned bills without objection. So ordered. We will now stand in recess until immediately following the votes on the floor.